Thank you all for joining the third part of this series. It's been a pleasure to work with Aryeh over the last few weeks, and really it's been quite enjoyable to see the landscapes of Israel, especially because we all cannot visit. This gives us a very special lens into a place that we all hold so close to home. It's my privilege to introduce you to a man who's devoted his whole life to building a stronger Israel for the next generation. Aryeh Green is the author of My Israel Trail. Oh, hi, sorry, I got distracted for 1 second. Aryeh Green is the author of My Israel Trail, an expert in Middle Eastern affairs and media issues, and has served as a senior advisor to Minister Natan Sharansky in the Israeli Prime Minister's office. Aryeh has been a leading advocate and activist for freedom and democracy for the last 2 decades. Now I turn the program over to Aryeh Green. Thank you.
Wow, well, thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Russell. It's been a pleasure to be doing this now here on our third segment of On the Trail, and I'm very happy to be here. So I'm actually in a place which I'm going to describe shortly, but I want to kind of set the stage a bit for those of you who have not joined us for the first 2 segments, which of course you can see on the JNF Facebook page or the JNF's website on demand. We've had a very interesting couple of weeks. This is now our 3rd segment. In the first segment, we started in the desert near Arad. And with the silence of the desert, we discussed the lesson that I learned of humility, of an understanding of a little bit of a perspective of who we are in the wider swath of history, looking at the history of the Jewish people, the people of Israel in the land of Israel, as we did there in Arad in the northern Negev, where the kingdom of King David reached over 3,000 years ago or so. And we also discussed the acceptance that I learned on the side of a mountain, Mount Shlomo, Har Shlomo, Mount Solomon, in the hills of Eilat, where I found myself bogged down and very, frustrated, not sure what to do, and I just accepted that reality, that's where I was on the side of a mountain. And those 2 lessons in humility and acceptance I shared with you in the first episode really helped me to come to terms with the devastating divorce that I had experienced, the real turning of the tables, turning of my world upside down, as it were, which is what I wrote about in the book, aside from the journey itself and the hiking of the Israel Trail. And then the second segment, we talked about the incredible gratitude that I felt, the sense of appreciation that I felt when walking through the hills of Jerusalem and also in the north, for all the blessings in my life, and the historical perspective it gave me, seeing, as we discussed at the Palmach Memorial, the sacrifices made, as Alterman, the national poet of Israel, said, Nathan Alterman, how we received this country, our nation, returning to our ancestral homeland after 2,000 years on a silver platter, meaning the incredibly valuable, precious sacrifices made. And that was true over the course of history, as well as within the context of the War of Independence and the other wars that we've fought. And we also talked last week of the forgiveness that I experienced, the very deep, heartfelt forgiveness of the world, of God, of my former life, that I felt through a number of different experiences on the border with Lebanon and up in the north, spending Shabbat in Tzfat, in the holy city of Safed, also infused with a sense of history of the mystics in the 14th, 15th century, 15th, 16th century there in Safed, in Tzfat, and wandering through the ruins of Tzipori, the ancient city from 2,000 years ago, a metropolis really, where I was just so connected to our roots as a people, seeing the ruins and the reconstruction of the market square and the houses with mikvaot, with baths in their basements, really connecting me to our people and our history. And the forgiveness that we talked about last week was not just personal, but also a sense national, how important it is that we forgive those who have attacked us and been hostile to our return to our ancestral homeland, and how important it is that they forgive us for our insistence on being here. And now we are literally at the end of our journey, end of our shared 3 weeks, 3 different sessions of these reminiscences and descriptions of my hike and the lessons that I learned that helped me heal from my personal challenge, or face my personal challenges, and also nearing the end of my journey of the Israel Trail after 6.5 weeks with about 10 days to go. I brought you now to join me to feel the exhilaration that I felt on Tuesday, 9 days to go after, I must be 600 of the 750 or so miles of Israel Trail, which I hiked, as you know, if you were here with our first segments, all alone in the course of 48 days of hiking, 8 weeks. I didn't hike on Shabbat. And here I was nearing the end, and it was clear I was going to finish this trek. And I came from the hills of the Carmel mountain range via Zichron Yaakov, one of the first Jewish communities in the Zionist reestablishment of our sovereignty here in Israel. And I came down through Jisr al-Zarqa, which is a small Muslim Arab village just north of Caesarea. And I want you to share with me the feeling. It's important that I share with you the experience coming across this coastal area. I reached a small hill, which it turns out to be the Tel Jisr al-Zarqa, a historical mound where there were some ruins of maybe 1,500 years ago. And as I climbed the hill, which I'd like you to do with me now, just about this time of the day, as the sun was setting, I climbed the hill and got to the top of the hill. And for the first time in 6.5 weeks, I saw in front of me the incredible expanse of, I'm going to turn my camera around and share with you what I saw as I got to the top. And I started singing. Here I was, not exactly here, but very, very near, just north over that hill there. And I started singing because I found myself at the sea, the wonderful, amazing, endless expanse of sea, which later when I was writing my book, I hadn't learned this in my psychology degree at UC Berkeley, but I discovered how much the sea adds to our appreciation of our endless possibilities. This kind of blue space, as scientists call it, neurologists call it, showing us the endless possibilities that await us, as it were, as we're sitting and contemplating the vastness of the universe. And singing and arriving here was really the beginning of my homecoming. And I would like to share with you some of the thoughts that I had as I was spending the last week walking from the sea home to my hometown of Beit Shemesh. Now, in a few minutes, you just jumped down with me as we walk towards the sea, where I'll have a little bit more of a sheltered place to share with you some of my reminiscences. I wanted you to feel that exhilaration of seeing the sea for the first time. Now, you can see a sea anywhere, of course. And I grew up in California, on the East Coast, going to Pompano Beach in Florida. In California, some of my favorite beaches, Half Moon Bay, Pomponio Beach, San Gregorio Beach, and of course, Stinson Beach, one of my family's favorites for years and years. There's something that connected me tremendously with the sea. But as I was saying, it was not just the sea itself, but this feeling of endless possibilities. That here I am finishing my trek, and I'm going to be moving on with my life, as it were. Now, you can see behind me, and this is a little bit of an amateur film setup, but I hope that you're enjoying the reality TV elements of our program today. I'm just going to pick up my book, which just dropped. You can see behind me the ancient Roman arches, which we'll talk about very shortly, because I want to connect a few dots, as I did last week, with our people's history, with my lessons that I learned in facing my new challenges, and the last lesson, the fifth lesson that I think I described in our first program. I'll share some thoughts with you, and then happy to take your questions as we wrap up. Now, having spoken about forgiveness, this deep sense of forgiveness, which I experienced up north, especially as I described last week, in a kind of a mikveh type experience of jumping into different creeks and streams and springs, with kind of the living waters of Eden, as it were. Having forgiven, looking towards the future, looking at the expanse of the sea, as it was, the idea of where I was going next became then the real focus of the last week of my trip, as I walked down the coast here to Tel Aviv and then headed inland. And I want to share with you a few, not just anecdotes, but kind of hidden treasures of Israel, which I hope and I assume that joining in with our discussion today in the last few weeks, one of the reasons that you're watching and hopefully enjoying is to be able to vicariously walk the trail with me, which is kind of one of the reasons that I wrote the book, to enable people to enjoy hiking the length and the breadth of the land of Israel with me, aside from learning also, or sharing the lessons that I learned that I've been told have helped others also meeting their own personal challenges. But I also want to share with you, for the next time that you're hopefully coming to visit Israel, a few wonderful elements, as I did these last 2 weeks, of that last week. And one of them was literally, I'm going to focus the camera if I can, down the coast, just because that's also a nice vista to see. Down the coast here is Caesarea, and south of Caesarea is Herzliya. I spent the last Shabbat I spent on the beach at the Sharon Beach, which is a wonderful national park and a treasure to come visit. But you might say, okay, there are lots of different beaches. And we'll come back in a second to this issue of where we are today. But just south of there, and I'm not going to give too many details. If you'd like, contact me on Facebook or by email, and I'll give you the exact coordinates. There is a pristine beach, a little hidden gem north of Herzliya, which is like almost a Caribbean beach. Clear, smooth waters, crystal clear, very private. And these are the kind of exciting discoveries that I made and that you can make, even if you just take a couple of hours or a half a day to take a hike on the Israel Trail next time you come to Israel. I mentioned last week Sataf, the park just outside of Jerusalem, where there's a reconstruction of biblical era agriculture. Another hidden gem is the Yarkon River. The Yarkon River, just to the north of Tel Aviv, has become kind of like the Central Park of Tel Aviv, if you will. It's long and narrow. It's not as big as Central Park in New York, but it is full of grass and trees and a winding river or stream. And people are fishing in it, and there are people boating on it. And we'll come back to that in a minute as I talk about this last lesson that I learned. Another thing I wanted to share with you is the sources of the Yarkon National Park, which is also an agricultural site, archaeological site back from the Greek and Roman period, and a wonderful park and play area for children as well, and for me, a terrific rest area where my friend Aaron came and joined me for lunch. And these are places, these three, just as just three examples of places that normally aren't on the tourist map, as it were, of Israel for most visitors. Well, that last week, as I made my way home to Beit Shemesh in the center of the country, my thoughts turned basically to the question of, okay, what's coming next? Looking out at the sea and contemplating and then walking along the sea for days on end. And I mentioned last time, I was 51 when I did this, not as the normal cohort of those who hike the Israel Trail who are 21, usually just after the army. And I did it not just all alone, but with a 50-pound pack on my back. And it's not an easy thing to trudge through the sand along along the coast, along the beach for days on end. But it certainly gives you a lot of time for contemplation. And my thoughts turn to the question of where am I going from here? I have to set some goals. I have to have some sense of purpose. And my thoughts return to something I mentioned the first segment of our program 2 weeks ago. And that was to Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Man's Search for Meaning is a phenomenal piece of both writing and psychology. Viktor Frankl created an entire school or set of principles in psychology, which he called logotherapy, which, and I'm truncating just because we don't have time to go into detail, the lessons that he learned from his terrible experience in the Holocaust, in the Shoah, taught him that people with a sense of meaning, with a sense of purpose, have more reason to live, and therefore we're more likely to survive the horrors of the Shoah. Of course, I'm not suggesting at all that the experience that I went through in terms of my difficulties and challenges I was facing is at all comparable, of course. But reading that book years ago in my psychology degree, I was remembering it as I walked along the coast and recognizing how important it is to have goals, to have a set of objectives. Now, of course, I had a goal every day, which was to get to the night camp where I had buried my water or wherever I was supposed to get for that day. And I had a general goal, which I had set for myself, which was to hike the entire length and breadth of the country through the Israel Trail. And I was clearly on my way to succeeding with that. But on a more specific personal level, of course, I had the personal goal to heal from my divorce. I needed to get my life back on track, and hiking on the trail, on the path, was very much almost a physical expression of that. I began in this last week of hiking through the areas that I was just describing, and up through the hills in Modi'in, and on my way past Neve Shalom to the hills outside of Beit Shemesh. And I started to think about my goals, the next goals that I wanted to set for myself in my life. And there were a number of them. Personal goals, being even more actively involved and more loving father to my children, with whom I'd always had a very strong and close and loving relationship, but rededicating myself to that, taking my professional career in a new direction, and beginning to work with my friend Yosef Abramowitz with his renewable energy company called Aryeh Global, widening my public activities to promote Israel in a more general fashion than I had been doing with the media in the previous 10 years and with Nathan Sharansky when we were in the Prime Minister's office. I had a number of different goals that I set for myself. But I recognized really while on the trail, or I kind of rediscovered maybe in another way, kind of the spiritual and national and human goals that I have pursued since I was a young adult. And there's no coincidence that I found walking the land of Israel immensely uplifting, because it combined so many of my personal values in one activity. Walking in nature, in the land of my people, where our prophets and our forefathers lived and walked, fought, worked, died, and where they introduced the ethical monotheism of Jewish thought and tradition to the world. At a time of our reestablished independence here, that was without question. As one friend suggested to me, my friend Moshe, one long meditation, an 8-week-long meditation. It really combined my love for the outdoors with a deep emotional identification with the Zionist enterprise, and a powerful aim to enhance and improve my spiritual and religious practice and commitment. And without question, I was able to recommit to my own personal and national sense of mission and meaning in being part of this return to Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel after 2,000 years of dispersion. And I have my book. I was going to read something from my book, but I don't think I will. But that's that thought that comes to me that I'm sharing with you now, that really accompanied me through the entire length and breadth of the journey. It was most specifically central to a number of experiences I had, including, I was going to show a photo, but I'm not going to try and get the technology to work here to show photos and while I'm on the phone here out at the beach. But I have a photo. You can see it on my website if you want to, or it's in the book. The website, by the way, is myisraeltrail.com. Not too difficult to remember. I have a picture there where I am smiling in front of the Roman road, which is a set of steps that were built by the Romans as they came up to Jerusalem in their attack on Jerusalem when they spent all that effort to to seize Jerusalem, then put a siege on Jerusalem. And they needed to find a way to get their wagons and donkeys up the mountain into Jerusalem. And they built a road there. And I have a picture where I'm kind of smiling in front of it and kind of maybe grinning, or I don't know what the word to use, but definitely feeling very much that, you know what, they were here, and where are they now? And I talk about, sorry, I'm just looking at some of the questions that you're asking. I talk in the book about Mark Twain's discussion of how the Romans and various other civilizations came and went, and yet the Jew remains eternal. And that connects me very much to where we are here today. This is the Roman Aqueduct that we were standing on before, that you can see behind me. And this Roman Aqueduct is a marvel of civil engineering. If I understand correctly, it drops about a half a centimeter over every kilometer, and it brings water from the springs up north of it inland and all the way down here to Caesarea. And it was magnificent. Some of you may remember in Monty Python's Life of Brian, where the revolutionary Jews are sitting around complaining about the Romans, and one of them says, "What have they ever done for us?" And the other says, "Well, they built roads, didn't they?" Yes, okay, well, we'll give them that. But other than that, what have they ever done for us? Well, they built aqueducts. Oh, yeah, we'll give them that. But what else have they done for us? Well, the joking side of that is evident here. The serious side of that joke is evident here. The Romans were here, and yet where are they now? And standing here, I have given many different Welcome to Israel talks to different groups who come to visit Israel. And we start here saying, "Welcome to Israel." I call this talk 3,500 Years of History in 35 minutes. And one of the main issues and one of the reasons why I hold the talk here is to say, you know, when you visit Israel and your focus is on the Arab-Israel conflict or domestic issues in politics here in Israel, or specific aspects of Israeli society that you may be animated by, or you object to, or you support, you have to have a little bit of a historical perspective, which I think the JNF takes very seriously in their very apolitical, non-political approach to supporting Israel, building in Israel, education in Israel, educating others about our history here, our connection to the land, the reality on the ground, as it were. And when I give this talk, Welcome to Israel, here in front of the aqueduct, one of the most important points that I like to share, which I'm sharing with you now, is to understand the historical perspective that one has to have. You know, history here, we talked last week about, I mentioned the Palmach, the fighters in the War of Independence. That was only 70 odd years ago. Here, this aqueduct is 2,000 years old, and you know what? It's not that old. That's kind of the middle of our history, as it were, because 3,500 years ago, Abraham came here, and 3,000 years ago, King David and King Saul ruled a sovereign kingdom of the people of Israel here in the land of Israel. And that's the perspective, I think, that it's so important for all of us to have when we're thinking about, talking about, visiting Israel, and especially if we're interested or we're involved in actively promoting Israel to politicians, or in the academic sphere, students, to church leaders, or others who perhaps lack some of that historical understanding of what we're actually doing here. Well, that kind of brings me back, talking about what we're doing here, the goal, the objective, the purpose that we have as the Jewish people of returning to our ancestral homeland, which we never left, of course. We've always had a presence here in certain cities, Tiberias, Sfat, Safed, Jerusalem, and elsewhere, even during the dispersion, the 2,000 years that we were dispersed after the Roman expulsion. We had a goal, and we have a goal, And that goal in the building of the state of Israel is not only to provide a refuge and a home for the Jewish people, for the people of Israel, but to be a light unto the nations. It was not a religious concept, even though it comes from the prophecy of Isaiah. It was a social, a civilizational concept that we as a people, Jews of every walks, meaning rich and poor, those who live here and those who live abroad in America or elsewhere, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, non-observant, all those who are connected to us as a people, and here in the state of Israel, also those who are not necessarily Jewish, those Arab and Druze, Bedouin, Muslim, Christian, and other communities who have thrown their lot in with the Jewish people. We have a sense of purpose. We have a sense of a goal. And that's one of the reasons why I think even with all the politics, including lately, this week, last week, next week, we have that sense of purpose that Viktor Frankl talks about to give our lives meaning as a nation, as a people. And of course, that is what I spent that last week, as I said, thinking about as I made my way home. But one of the goals that I set for myself, just for the record, I'm sharing with you, I think, I'm not sure, but I think Miriam may be watching now. But as I was walking along the Yarkon River, I came across a lovely, beautiful set of flowers that had been placed there by, I guess, some Tel Aviv municipal worker on a stump, on a stump of a tree with the trail sign on it, which was always very welcome because sometimes you lose your way on the trail. And so you see the trail sign. And I think I mentioned this in the first segment, kind of like in Castaway when Tom Hanks was always talking to his ball, Wilson. I used to talk to the trail signs and welcome the trail sign as a welcome friend when I saw it. And this one, I stopped and I actually took a photo of this beautiful purple, red, white, lilac, pink flowers on top of the stump with the trail sign. And just as I finished taking the picture, two pigeons, two doves, I like to say, and I think they were doves, fluttered around and then landed on that, right by those flowers. And all of a sudden a thought came to me. And the thought was, you know, doves, apparently it's an urban legend. And I looked this up later when I was writing the book, and apparently it is true that doves mate for life. And my first thought was, if they can mate for life, why couldn't we? Why couldn't I? How come I couldn't do that? And it could have been very melancholy. It could have been a sad moment, but it wasn't, because something clicked. Something clicked in my heart at that point. And I knew right then that I was open to the possibility to love again. And in fact, I almost sent a text message to my children saying, I'm ready to love again. And it's probably a good thing I didn't, because I don't think their mind or heart was in the same place that I was at that point as I was walking along the Yarkon River. But sure enough, aside from the other goals that I set for myself, which I'm thankful to say I put into action in terms of my professional career and other personal goals, I was lucky enough to find, well, I should say Miriam found me, the love of my life. And we were married a year after I finished hiking the trail. My beautiful and warm and caring and giving wife, Miriam. And among the other goals and purposes and sense of meaning, well, that's giving meaning to my life. There's no question that was a big part of it. And there were other goals that I set for myself as well that I have not yet achieved. I have made wine, as I mentioned, when we were down in Arad for 20 years as a hobby. And I have set a goal to open my own winery, and that is slowly on its way. I'm beginning to raise the investment funds for that at this point. I've made wine from my garden with 21 vines in my back garden for the last 15 years. But that goal, I think after my next book, which I mentioned a little bit in answer to a question a week ago, my next book is about applying these 5 lessons to the Arab-Israel conflict. Trying to get these 5 lessons to give us a new approach, a radically new approach. And maybe that's a good place and a time and a way for me to kind of summarize, since this is our last part of our journey together. I mean, at base, taken to heart, an individual with a humble sense of purpose, combining that last goal of purpose, of goals, giving our lives meaning, and my first goal of the humility that I discussed. An individual with a humble sense of purpose has a greater motivation to forgive to forgive actual grievances or imagined hurts, and more to appreciate. We talked about gratitude as one of the five elements or the lessons that I learned. More to appreciate, more reason to be grateful, and certainly has an enhanced incentive to accept the acceptance that we were talking about, to accept the historical and present reality that we're in, because you just want to move forward in life to achieve our goals, personal, national, or what have you. And this was true for me on the Shvil, that's the Hebrew word for the trail. It's true for me in my life, and it can be true for others who are seeking solace and direction. And that's, I guess, kind of why I wrote the book, to describe my experiences on the Shvil, how they help me face my personal challenges and how they can help others facing their own hardships. I won't go into detail about how I'm applying these to our predicament with the Arab-Israel conflict, but I mentioned last week, just in passing, that forgiveness will play a large role in that, and I mentioned that here as we started today too. I can only say, in kind of a way of summary, and then I'm happy to take some questions, Sarah. I'll let you kind of summarize them or pose questions, because I can't see the chat as I'm talking. I would just say that through my experiences on the Shvil, on the trail, physically, and on the processes of the inner exploration and the personal growth that I went through during and after the trek, I discovered a path which I'm confident can be of enormous help to others facing similar challenges. Based, as really it is, all of these lessons that I've described are based on the time-honored wisdom of giants, from Talmudic sages to modern psychologists, teachers, and writers. You might remember, if you joined us for the first session, I said we sometimes have to set aside our baggage. I described being on the side of a cliff and putting my backpack down in order to try and figure out where the path went. Sometimes we have to set aside our baggage and reevaluate. And that's kind of one of the subtle lessons also that I learned while hiking the Israel Trail. Basically, looking at the setting sun, I'm going to turn around and share that with you too. Now, looking, I hope that it comes through with the camera, because you never know quite what the quality is going to be. But the sun setting over the Mediterranean, as I came over the rise there at Jishal Zakra, this exhilarating feeling of arrival, of this sense of possibilities, gave me a sense of confidence and a new sense of purpose and gratitude and acceptance and humility. And those five things, the humility, the acceptance, the gratitude, forgiveness, and this sense of purpose, have found a home in me. And you don't have to hike 700 miles on the Israel Trail with a 50-pound pack on your back for 8 weeks in order to, doing it all alone, in order to come to those conclusions. I hope that this has been something that's been helpful, interesting, fun for all of you who have joined us. I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a walk, assuming that my battery holds out, as I happily take your questions and give you any more information that you'd like about the Shvil. And I'm happy to have you join me here on the beach in Caesarea with the aqueduct behind me. And Sarah, I'll pass it on to you, and we can talk further.
Thank you so much. So firstly, just wow, it was absolutely beautiful. I would say this was all the calls have been great, but just in terms of scenery, this one was really absolutely incredible. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Sarah.
If anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A. I do have one from someone who couldn't be on the call who wanted me to ask on their behalf. And it was just, they were wondering, was there a specific part of the trail that was the most memorable for you? I know it's like, how do you pick just one? But if you could.
Kind of to use too much hyperbole, but that's like asking me which of my children are my favorite. I have 3 children. I now have 4 grandchildren and 1 more on the way. And of course, one couldn't answer that question with any real honesty. On the other hand, there are certain places which definitely were highlights, absolute highlights. And I can rattle off the names of a few. because they're the kind of things that this is being recorded, and therefore people can look these kind of things up afterwards. Nachal Amud in the north, coming down from it's called the stream of the pillar, coming down from Tzfat, from Safed, towards the Kinneret, towards the Sea of Galilee, is just a wonderful hike and a day hike, which is full of a lot of different surprises. The Baram forest, right on the border with Lebanon, was a real gem in the middle of a beautiful green forest. I felt like I was in Switzerland and completely alone. I mentioned already Sataf, the park outside of Jerusalem with the reconstruction of biblical era agriculture, which is full of springs and ruins from over 1,500 years ago. Wonderful place for a day. And by the way, for visitors who are in Jerusalem, it's only 20 minutes from Jerusalem, and you're in literally a different world. There are so many others, of course, that I could mention. I've already given a few hints, like to this Caribbean type seaside location down north of Herzliya. But the one other that I would definitely like to say a few more words about is Tzipori. I mentioned how Tzipori for me in the north really connected me to our ancestors, to our forefathers. Now, I talked about when we were back down there in the desert 2 weeks ago in our first program, how hiking through the desert made me feel like I was walking in the footsteps of the children of Israel in their 40 years of wandering through the desert, and how I related to the names of some of the different places that I walked through. Tzipori is an archaeological excavation of what was a major metropolis, as I mentioned, in the north, in Talmudical times. And it was a metropolis in every sense of the word. It was 30,000 people, which back then was like New York, if you will. It was a city or a town full of all sorts of different people, meaning early Christians, Byzantine, I guess before the Byzantine era, early Christians and others, Mesopotamians, the Assyrians. It was just a miraculous kind of community, if you will, but you really get the feeling walking through it, the marketplace, and I mentioned the mikvaot in the houses. You really get the feeling that even though they practiced their Judaism very differently than we do today, I don't care whether you're Orthodox, Reform, or Conservative, it was different 2,000 years ago. They had mikvahs. They had ritual baths in their basements in each house. But that's one of the amazing things. There's nowhere else. It's one of the greatest examples from the archaeological side of things that proves that these were Jews living there in these houses, because no other ancient culture had these ritual baths in their basements. And I really felt there, what a highlight of my trip, the combination. It's in the middle of a forest. It's archaeology and connecting to our ancestors. It was, of course, the combination of history and nature, the people I met there, the Arab village right below it that I walked through, and I slept in the forest behind and spoke with people, and Arab Muslims saying to me, hey, kol hakavod, good for you for hiking the Israel Trail. That's one place that I would definitely encourage people to visit.
Well, thank you so much. We are running just about almost to the hour, so I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time over the past 3 weeks. It's been a real pleasure getting to see Israel through your lens, and for all of us joining, from not only the U.S. but I'm sure all over the world. It's really nice to be able to visit somewhere that we do hold so close to home. So thank you so much. If anyone has any last minute questions,
Sarah.
Please type them in. And if not, we look forward to more programming on JNF On Demand. And Aryeh, when you come to the stateside, we can't wait to host you for an intimate meeting. Not on the beach, unfortunately.
Well, next time.
Another time.
I'll be delighted to welcome, please God, when Corona is managed and we're back to visiting, be delighted to welcome any of your groups or individuals here in Saria or otherwise when you come to Israel, to host you for a bottle of wine on my balcony in Beit Shemesh as we watch a sunset not so different from this, and certainly very happy to, please God, next time I travel to America, to come and meet with any of the JNF groups. And of course, I'm always very, very, very fond of. Thank you very much, Sarah, for all
Great.
your hard work and
Wait,
making this
one last
happen.
thing. Jonathan is
Yeah.
asking which kid is your favorite?
you
So
realize
we will.
that's my son,
Yes.
my eldest son, asking me which is my favorite. Well,
So on
let's
that,
put it this way: Yonatan is my favorite oldest son. Michal is my favorite first daughter, and Moria is my favorite youngest daughter.
okay, perfect. On that
Wishing
note, again, thank you all so much, and we look forward to hearing from you again another time. So thank you.
you all Shabbat Shalom and happy July 4th.
Thank you.